right. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is 12:01. We're going to go ahead and get started. You are in the information session for our FY25, how to apply information session for the creativity grant, specifically for our project-based support and our new option, which is the planning grant. So if we have not met or I've not seen you virtually or in person, my name is Emily Sollenberger. I'm a program director for Art Services and joined by my colleague Laura Weiss, who we both oversee the creativity grant program along with some other programs, but we're both going to take you through the information session today to give you lots of details. As I noted before we hit the record button, this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to the website shortly after this meeting. So don't feel like you need to take a ton of notes. This will be a resource for you throughout the year. Before we get into the meat of the information today, just some housekeeping slides to get started. On the screen, you'll see a reference shot of Google Meet if you're not familiar. If you're on a desktop, most of your controls and buttons you'll see towards the bottom of your screen. If you're on a mobile device, it might be a little bit different, but just be mindful of that microphone button, the video button, which you can choose to have on or off. We ask that you stay on mute throughout the meeting until we get into the Q&A session. Also note there's a closed caption option, so it should be 2 C's with a box around it right next to the video button. There's also an option for reactions if you feel like you'd like to use that. A raise hand feature, which is the hand button. So once we get to the Q&A session, just note that if you'd like to vocalize any questions or comments that you might have. And then the red button is that end call. If you hit that by mistake, you can still join the link and come right back into the meeting and pick up wherever you left off there. Additionally, towards the bottom right corner, again, if you're on a desktop, if it's a mobile device, it might be a little bit different, but there is a chat feature. It is a box with 3 lines in it. It looks like a chat bubble. Just note that you can drop in any questions or comments in that. It is public, so everybody can see it. So there's other platforms where you can send private messages. Google Meet does not have that. So just make sure that whatever you're putting in the chat, everybody will be able to see. And we can vocalize any questions or comments if you prefer from that chat feature. Moving forward, we at the State Arts Council for any public meetings like to start with some grounding slides. So I am going to read these aloud for accessibility purposes. The first is our land acknowledgement statement. And that is, we acknowledge the lands and waters now known as Maryland are the home of its first peoples. The Accohonic Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Chopticot Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nasu-Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Youghiogheny River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that are nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that our reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. Additionally is our equity and justice statement, and that's the arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council and its supporting collaborators are committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organizations and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, class, language, and/or ability. Additionally, the vision of the Maryland State Arts Council plays an essential role ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And we do this through our mission, which advances the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all the people of Maryland. And on the screen here, you'll see 5 goals that are associated with our current strategic plan, which was developed in 2019. We are at the very tail end of this particular strategic plan and in the process of developing a new strategic plan, which is really exciting for our team. But for right now, we're sticking with the 5 goals here, which I'll read aloud here. So goal 1 is to increase participation. Goal 2 is to leverage intentional support. 3 is build capacity, 4 is leverage connections, and 5, bolster Maryland arts. We also like to uplift some creative meeting actions within our public meetings as well. This just kind of helps us all keep these things in mind when we're working with other people. And we have 35. We might have more people join us today, so it's good to know, especially when we come to that Q&A session towards the end of this session. So keeping in mind as we move forward, celebrate being in the space with other creative people. Engage with everyone's presence as a gift. Acknowledge that together we know a lot. Enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry. Share your idea and trust that it will be heard. Use I statements. Focus your language on the task at hand. Hold one another accountable with care. Apply yes and. I hear your idea and I'm going to add to it. And balancing your speaking and listening. The next couple of slides here are just informational, just so you all are aware of what offerings there are at the State Arts Council. And one of them is our own professional development offerings. We're hosting a lot of topic-specific sessions, in particular information sessions just like this over the next couple of weeks. So take a look at our Eventbrite page whenever you get a chance. That was where you signed up for today's session. You probably saw a lot of other opportunities as well. So those are ever changing as we develop professional development and partner with other organizations and individuals throughout the year. We also have been hosting in-person regional office hours across the state. We were just in Annapolis last week. We're going to be out in Carroll County in a couple of weeks. We are also going to be at the Maryland Arts Summit, which is next Thursday and Friday, and also hosting our office hours in that space too. So if you haven't already signed up for the Maryland Arts Summit, that is facilitated by Maryland Citizens for the Arts. So something that you can take a look at if you'd like. Laura's dropping some links in the chat too, so feel free to take a closer look at that. Another way to get involved with the State Arts Council a little bit more is to consider being a panelist or an editor or a juror for some of our programs. In terms of panelist opportunities, these are folks that review and score applications, just like the Creativity Grant throughout the years, and editors give input on public programs. So if we're making some shifts in programs, we ask editors from the public to come and be involved with that policy and those updates and changes. So we have your perspective when making decisions. All of those types of public calls are available on our website on the Ways to Get Involved page. And I think Laura dropped the link in the chat for that as well. I don't think there's any open calls at the moment, but there's typically a schedule there, and that would be the place where you would find other ways to get involved with the State Arts Council. You would apply through Smart Simple, which is our grant platform, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the context of the Creativity Grant. But as a panelist or editor or any of these other opportunities, you get specific training and support from program directors or those that are leading that particular program. And you're compensated for your time and service, which is really great. And typically when we put a call out, it'll detail that compensation as well. So moving forward into the agenda for the Creativity Planning Grant, what we're going to talk about today in a little bit more detail is as an overarching overview of the Creativity Grant Program and guidelines. We're going to hone in specifically on the planning option for the Creativity Grant. We're going to go through the application and provide some helpful hints along the way, talk about the monthly review process, the Smart Simple Grant platform, and then if we have some time, we'll open it up to any questions that you all may have. And we do ask that you hold your questions to the end. Most of the time, we're going to get through some of those questions that might arise at the beginning of our presentation, and they'll be answered throughout. So if you can hold on to your question, that would be great, but also feel free while you're thinking about it, put it in the chat and we can address it along the way. So moving forward, just to kind of give an overview of the Creativity Grant Program, the program itself was established to support activities and general operations for independent artists and organizations across the state. Again, we're going to focus specifically on the planning grant today, which is a new opportunity through the Creativity Grant. So the other topics and the other opportunities we'll discuss at other information sessions. Ultimately, the goal of the Creativity Grant and our funding is to continue to strengthen the vitality and sustainability of our artists and our organizations across the state to make sure we're creating a strong and stable arts infrastructure. And this helps to continue to serve the growing needs of projects that develop from community in collaboration with artists and other organizations across our communities as well. So as a general starting point, when we're just looking at the Creativity Grant as a whole, they are available to independent artists and organizations. There's either project-based support or general operating support. General operating support is for our organizations only. So if you're an independent artist, you would find yourself in the project support. Overall, depending on the type of application you select, it's a brief application. We'll get into that a little bit further. And applications are accepted on a rolling basis and reviewed monthly. So for FY25, the cycle that's coming up, it's going to open on July 1st, so just in a couple of weeks, and it will be open through April 30th. So you can essentially apply anytime between July 1st and April 30th of 2025. And you're able to receive one creativity grant per fiscal year. Moving forward, we're going to go into more detail, but just kind of as a starting point, there are some new options and some shifts. If you've been familiar with the Creativity Grant, maybe you've applied for it or maybe you've even received it in the past, there are some new options. So again, we will continue to have general operating support for our organizations. And we've always had project-based support, but we're splitting this up into two different types this year. So the planning grant, which we're going to focus on more today, is the new option for artists or organizations to select that instead. There are also new funding amounts that we've shifted. So in the past, the Creativity Grant has been up to $4,000, whether it's general operating or project support. Moving into FY25, general operating support for our organizations will go up to $5,000. The new planning option will be up to $2,000, and our implementation grant, which is basically the same iteration of what the Creativity Grant for project-based support has been in the past, if you're familiar, will remain up to $4,000. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Laura to go through who can apply in more detail here.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily, and hello, everyone. First, I want to apologize. I have my camera off because, as Emily said at the beginning of the meeting, we're actually in our offices today in the World Trade Center, and the Wi-Fi is not super strong in the space that I'm in. So hopefully you can hear me okay, but I think I'm going to leave the camera off just so we can avoid as many glitches as possible. If I can add it later, I certainly will. But to just walk through the eligibility for who can apply to the Creativity Grant. The Creativity Grant is open to organizations and independent artists for project-based support. when we're looking at the type of organizations that are eligible to apply, you would need to be one of the following. You need to have a 501c3 nonprofit organization designation, and that organization must be incorporated in Maryland or have a significant physical presence in Maryland. We do accept Model A fiscal sponsorships for organizations. So if you are a fiscally sponsored organization, and chances are if you fall into that camp, you would know that you are a fiscally sponsored organization, we can accept the Model A version of that, which is really having that comprehensive sponsorship. And sponsors. That's a very technical definition of that. If you have questions about, your fiscal sponsorship model, or if you are indeed fiscally sponsored, Emily and I are, of course, happy to talk to you about that. We're also able to take applications from units of government. So that might, fall under a town, city, county, state agency, or something to that effect. We can take applications also from colleges or universities in the state of Maryland, and also schools that could be public or private schools that are serving grades pre-K all the way through 12. For organizations, this is getting into some of the technicalities. Generally speaking, with creativity grants, we're looking at smaller organizations overall. Organizations with an allowable income of $50,000 or less, or organizations that are not currently funded through one of our other general operating programs, such as the Grants for Organizations program. So if you are an organization that is funded through the GFO program, for example, you would not be eligible to receive a creativity grant. That would mean you can't get one for a project and you can't get one for general operating. You're just not eligible across the board. That would also include our A&E districts and our county arts agencies as well. Just a couple of other things about, looking at when your organization might be applying. Only one application per project or program will be considered for funding. And the organization must produce or present arts programs, services, or projects that are relevant to its community and are available to the public. Additionally, an organization has to have operated as an arts organization or arts program for one full fiscal year and be able to submit a financial statement for the most recently completed fiscal year as part of the application. We're generally, for new organizations, if you're brand new, perhaps just got your 501c3 designation, we are able to look at project-based support for those organizations, but you would not be eligible for general operating support until you have that full year under your belt. And if you're brand new or, just sort of establishing that, then Emily and I can certainly talk to you about what's the best fit, when the best timing to apply is, all of that. So if you're not sure if your organization's eligible, if you have questions about that, you can always feel free to reach out to us to discuss further. In terms of independent artists, we're really looking at artists in this case that don't have any affiliation with an organization. So you're working independently. Some of the technical aspects of this would be that you must be a Maryland resident and you must be 18 years of age or older to apply. You cannot be enrolled in high school, undergrad, or graduate degree program to apply to the Creativity Grant program. And your proposed project or activities must take place in Maryland. And again, only one application per project will be considered. So often we get questions of, what can the Creativity Grant support? And those, the eligible expenses for the Creativity Grant would be really looking at expenses that are directly related to the proposed arts activity. And a lot of times those fall under categories such as artist fees or stipends, consultant fees, marketing and promotional needs, of course, your artistic materials and supplies that you need to produce your product or your program, space or venue rentals, If equipment is needed that is directly connected to the activities and would not be considered a capital expense, that can be included. So basically anything that is associated specifically with your artistic activity is, generally speaking, going to be eligible here. Something new to point out that is very specific to the planning grant support travel outside of Maryland. And that would be something that if you had a specific research opportunity, for example, that you needed to, let's say you needed to go to Chicago and you needed to go to a specific library to research a very specific topic related to your proposed activity, that could be eligible under this new planning grant. That is not something that is eligible under the implementation grant or the general operating grant. So just something to keep in the back of your mind as you're starting to think about these new opportunities. There are a couple things that are definitely we cannot support through the creativity grant, and that includes regranting or scholarships. We can't support capital improvements or the purchase of permanent equipment as part of the creativity grant. We can't support activities that aren't open to the public. That there is a little bit more about that specific to the planning portion within the application. So we'll get to that later about how that can fit into this. We cannot support activities that are primarily therapeutic in nature. We also can't support day-to-day expenses associated with the running of a for-profit business. And lastly, just like any grant with the Maryland State Arts Council, the funds can't be used for any political reasons. So no political contributions, lobbying activities, and things like that. And of course, if you have questions about what's eligible, what's not, can it be used, can it not, Emily and I can always go through that with you and talk more specifically about your specific proposal. So here we are at the actual application. There's going to be, like we've said from the beginning, there's a couple of different what we call tracks that you can choose from. So there's the general operating support track, which is specifically for organizations, and we had a session yesterday about that. So that's one whole track. And then there's the other track that we're going to look at more specifically today, which is the project support. And within that, then there are two decisions to make, either the planning grant or the implementation grant. And those, again, are available to either independent artists or organizations. No matter what selection you make, there are going to be, there's three broad narrative questions associated with each of those. Generally speaking, the three applications have the same basic structure, but the questions are worded just slightly differently depending on the type of application that you're applying for. So the project-based support really focuses on one specific project or program or event that you're proposing. If you were to apply for the general operating support application as an organization, that's really looking at the full year of operations. So those are just some distinctions between the different applications. Additionally, organizations with, if you're applying for the project support or the general operating support, you would have to upload a financial statement that's part of the application. This is something that is not needed if you are an independent artist, so you don't have to worry about that. So looking at these new options, and there's a lot of questions to think about when you're determining, am I better suited for the planning grant or am I better suited for the implementation grant? So these are just some questions to think through and answer for yourself to help kind of determine what track might make sense. We'd recommend really thinking about where you're at in the creative process. So if you're in those really early phases, you might be suited best with the planning grant, as opposed to if you're in the later phases and really kind of coming into the execution of the project itself, then you're probably better suited for the implementation grant. We recommend really thinking about the scope of your proposal and thinking about the timeline overall. So if you're, you're proposing something that's going to happen in 3 months, That's happening really quick. So you're probably going to go right to the implementation grant because there wouldn't be enough time to look at the planning and then also the implementation. It's a smaller scope if you're looking at something that's happening in a couple of months, generally speaking. If your project is lasting multi-years, a big film project or something to that effect, then the scope is much larger and you might be able to divide it into different phases. So that's just something to think about. Another question is thinking about, does the current proposal include what we'll call a quote unquote final product that will be seen or experienced by the public? If it does, then chances are that's probably going to be better suited for the implementation grant. If the current proposal focuses specifically on those early steps of the phases of a much larger project, kind of like I said before, this would likely be better suited for the planning grant. If the current proposal really includes plans for research and or development of a project that might not be seen or experienced by the public until a much later phase in the project, then that's probably going to be better suited for the planning grant. So these are just a couple of examples. They're by no means an exhaustive list. There's lots of other situations and different things that might come up, but just some examples of what we're thinking about when we're thinking about the planning grant. So the planning grant might include research and development for a project. And again, like I said before, that might include travel outside of Maryland for research and planning purposes. It might be really focused on your time yourself as an artist and a stipend for developing or creating a work that doesn't necessarily have a concrete plan for future exhibition or showing. So that might be, if you're a painter, that might be time to really work on the paintings itself, but you might not have that exhibition totally figured out on what that's going to be for the future. It's really looking at your time. It also might be looking at creating something like a proof of concept. Maybe you're workshopping a brand new play if you're a playwright. You're creating a demo if you're a recording artist. Again, that's a smaller beginning step of a larger project. On the flip side, examples of implementation grants might include a proposal that really includes that final product that would be experienced by an audience or the public. That's going to include the things that have typically fallen under the creativity grant, things like exhibitions and shows, concerts, productions, album recordings, publishing. All of that would fall under the implementation grant. And we know this is new, and we are, these are just examples of what some of these would be. So certainly if you're not sure, which would be the best choice, that's what we're here for, is to have one-on-one conversations about your proposal and to put you into the right track for this time. It is important also to note that a project does not need to receive both a planning grant and an implementation grant. It can receive one or the other. But just when you're thinking through when to apply for what, keep in mind that a project may receive a planning grant in one fiscal year and an implementation grant in another fiscal year. So you're only eligible for one creativity grant as a whole per fiscal year. If you're going to go for both phases, they would have to go into 2 different fiscal years. If you do get a planning grant, there's no expectation of then also applying for an implementation grant later. So if you just need support for the planning portion of your project, that's fine. You don't have to then later apply also for implementation. And it doesn't benefit you one way or the other. If you get a planning grant, that's not going to somehow give you bonus points in an implementation grant or something like that. Each grant type has its own separate scoring rubric, and they would have entirely different sets of panelists reviewing from one year to the next. So there's not, you don't have to do one to do the other. That's not going to necessarily help or hurt or anything like that, your chances of getting one or the other. All right, we're into the actual application itself. I'm going to pass it over to Emily to talk through the application questions and scoring rubric.
Great, thanks, Laura. And that was helpful to hear kind of the framework of the 2 types of project grants. So moving forward into the application itself, we're really looking at just this planning option right now. So when you, if you're thinking about applying, these are the three narrative questions that you can expect to see. The first question is to describe your planning and or development process as it relates to your proposed arts activities, program, or event. And then within your response, we would like for you to consider including overarching goals or intentions for the future of that proposed project, details of your creative process and how this planning phase fits within the larger scope of the project. And then also consider including goals for the future community engagement and intended impact with the finalized project. The information here on the screen in italics is part of the scoring rubric. So this is what an excellent to outstanding response may include. That includes a clear and specific, thorough explanation of the artist's or organization's planning or development phase of a larger proposed arts activity, event, project, which includes clear and thorough evidence of larger goals and community engagement impact and how the planning fits in within the larger scope. So in between these questions, we're going to provide some helpful hints. So some things to consider when you're thinking about just that first question is to really describe those planning activities with specific details. So really asking those questions of who, what, when, where, and why within that first narrative space. We also recommend approaching your narrative as if the reader has no idea what you're proposing. So give them really the full picture of what you're planning or developing, what those goals are and how it could support that larger goal or project. Most, a lot of our panelists who will be reviewing these applications represent different communities across the entire state of Maryland. So if you're a Baltimore-based artist, you might have somebody from Washington County reviewing this. So really keeping in mind that there might be some new folks that would have eyes on this application. So really coming from it, introducing yourself or your organization and really clearly painting that picture of what you're planning to do. Another useful exercise that we recommend is having a trusted friend or a family member, a colleague, somebody who might not know a lot about your proposal, read through your draft application and have them poke holes in it and ask questions of you, and it might help you fill in those blanks that might have been unclear before submitting. The second question is around the timeline. So we ask that you provide a detailed timeline with specific activities or tasks for the planning and development process that you described in that first question. It's not necessary to include that full timeline for all of the implementation phase for your overall project. We do ask that you include details for the planning and development process because that's what that grant's really about, right? So in italics, you'll see what an excellent to outstanding response includes, and that's a clear, specific, realistic timeline for the planning and development phase of the project, demonstrating a realistic schedule, including specific timing and dates as it relates to expenditure of funds, activities associated with the planning and development of that project. And some helpful hints here, again, include a full timeline or schedule of the planning and development phase from beginning to end. So all of those details that you can think of would be helpful to give the full context of what you're thinking about that planning of that project or program or activity. One other thing that we tend to recommend is to consider a weekly or even a monthly listing or other time increment, depending on the length of your timeline, with specific dates and timelines that share all of those steps of the process. So for example, if you have say a 2-month planning period, you might benefit from having a weekly schedule of what you're planning to do within that 2-month period of time. And that also helps to organize thoughts a lot of times, and it also helps the reader to really see things in order and what you're planning and what your activities are. The third question is around the budget. So we ask that you provide a detailed budget, including all planned expenses and anticipated income beyond the State Arts Council request that's applicable to the planning and development process that you outlined, again, in that first question. So again, it's not necessary to include the entire full budget for that may include an implementation phase if you're looking at that longer process, but really hone in on the planning and the development. That's what we're really asking you to look at. So again, an excellent to outstanding response includes that clear and detailed, realistic financial plan for income and expenses as it relates to the planning and development activities that you described throughout the application. And again, a couple helpful hints to consider would be, to include a clear listing that shows specific line items for all of that planned income and expenses, and a description of how you got to that total. So for example, you see here that we're using an artist fee as an example. You might have $500 that's budgeted for an artist fee. To give further context and description, it might be helpful for the reader to know how you got to that $500. So perhaps including if it's an hourly rate of $25 an hour for 20 hours, perhaps it's an agreed upon flat rate that you came up with that particular person. It's really helpful to see further detail within these kind of smaller projects or the context of a planning or development. The response for your budget must be in the context of the narrative. So we'll get into the Smart Simple grant platform a little bit later, but you have a specific space that you would drop in your budget information, including those income and expenses. So other attachments, such as like a link to a spreadsheet, or perhaps an attachment of a PDF of your financials, those would not be considered. We really want you to put it in the context of the application. Our panelists are not required to open up external links, and they're also not encouraged to open up external links. They really are looking at what's presented in the application. So just want to be mindful that you are including kind of that listing within the answer itself and not providing that external link or document. And then finally, you are also asked to include a couple additional things. An attachment that would be a Form W-9. So for our organizations, that would be your organization W-9. For independent artists, that would be your personal W-9 that would have your social security number and a signature and date on it.
Okay, just a little bit.
Oops, hearing some feedback there. Put that on mute. There we go. Additionally, we ask that you provide an electronic signature within the application. This is really just typing your name. It's not one of the fancy ones. It's really just typing in to make sure everything is accurate and clear and true. For our organizations, you will have to provide a financial statement for your previously completed fiscal year. So that might be your calendar year 23, if that's where you're at in the year, or perhaps your FY23 or FY24, depending on where you're at in your year. But it would be the previous year financial statement. If you're an independent artist applying, you don't need to worry about a financial statement. We really just want your budget section to be clear in the context of the application. Additionally, we went over the rubric, those excellent to outstanding scores, and the application questions here, but we also put that in the form of a scoring rubric on the website. So we're just wrapping up the tail end of the FY25 rubrics, and those will be posted on the program pages that you'll have access to each question and the scoring rubric, so you have a clear understanding of the scoring and what the panelists will be using to score your application. Moving along, just a couple of reminders. We've had this information a little bit in a couple slides ago, but for the planning grant, this is available up to $2,000. You can receive one planning grant per fiscal year. And when we say fiscal year, we're referring to our fiscal year, which is July 1st through June 30th. Additionally, the creativity grants are what we call an all or none grant. So if you're awarded, you will receive the requested amount. So if you're requesting $2,000 and you're awarded, you're going to receive the $2,000. We do not offer a percentage or a portion of the requested amount. We really want to honor what your request is and how that would contribute to your program or your project. All right, and then moving along into the review process, all of the applications we mentioned are accepted on a rolling basis and reviewed and awarded monthly. So the applications for FY25 will open on July 1st, so in a couple of weeks, and the open application period will go through April 30th of 2025. We essentially batch the applications that are received by month, and then they're reviewed the next month with a notification to follow. So for example, you'll see here, if you apply throughout the month of August, so anywhere from August 1st to August 31st, we batch all of those applications that we receive in that month, and they're then reviewed in September by the panel. Notifications are then sent by early October. So that monthly cycle occurs throughout that application window of July 1st to April 30th, with the last review period being in May, essentially. And as we've mentioned here, all of the applications are reviewed by panelists. This year, we're going to have a dedicated group of panelists who are reviewing our general operating track organization. So only our organizations that are applying for general operating will have a specific group of people reviewing those. And then another group of panelists who will be dedicated to reviewing our project applications. So that would include the planning applications along with the implementation applications. It's a little bit different than how we've structured it in the past. So we just want to make that clear, that you'll have a dedicated group of folks that would be reviewing project applications only. And just a reminder that the staff, so Laura and myself, while we oversee this program, we're not scoring the applications. We do train our panelists, and we do provide support, feedback, as much as we can to make sure you're successful, but ultimately it is our panelists that are scoring the applications. And then if you go through the process and you're awarded, congratulations, that's amazing. As a reminder, you can only receive one of those creativity grants per fiscal year. And once you're awarded in FY25, you would then not be able to apply again until FY26. So in the context of project, the planning grant and the implementation grant, say you get a planning grant in FY25 and you want to apply for the implementation grant to support the end of your project, you can then you wouldn't be able to apply for implementation until the FY26 cycle. So you get planning and then implementation. Upon your award notification that would be sent to you via email, you would then sign and return a grant agreement form through Smart Simple, our grant platform. So that would all happen digitally from that platform. You would sign it, and then the State Arts Council would then countersign that grant agreement form, so then it would be fully executed. From that point forward, payment then moves through the payment process, which does take about 6 to 8 weeks from the date of the receipt of a fully executed grant agreement form. So really, once you get that award notification, we advise that you sign that grant agreement form pretty quickly, just so things continue to move forward and the payment process can get started. If you're awarded, you are required to complete a final report. Applications that are submitted between July 1st, 2024 and December of 2024 will have a final report deadline of August 15th, 2025. Applications that are submitted between January and April of 25 would have a final report deadline of December 31st, 2025. So this is a little bit different than how we've done things in the past and in previous fiscal years. So we're really looking at getting our beginning half of our applications and awardees get their final reports in August, and then that second half in December. It also gives you a little bit of a longer period of time for those that apply in January and April through April to get your projects completed and those planning grants completed, use of funds, and then report out in December. When you're signing or when you're completing that grant agreement form and spending funds, you are agreeing that you're spending or obligating funds to their assigned final report date. So that just means that you want to expend your funds, make sure they're encumbered or otherwise legally committed to be used by the final report date. So that way, we just know that there's no unspent funds or there's no plan for the funds. So really, we just want to make sure they're committed and used by that final report so that you can report on it and we know how things are going for you. And I'll also note in regards to the final report that once you get your fully executed grant agreement form in Smart Simple, the final report is also going to be in Smart Simple and it will show up in your dashboard once that is fully executed. So you will have access to what those questions are, things to think about. It's intended to be short, so but we really want to make sure you have access so you can see that and think about that in the months that you'd be using the funds as well. Additionally, if you're not awarded, that's okay. We do encourage you to try again. This is a very popular and can be competitive program, so it does sometimes take a couple of times to apply, but Laura and I are here to work with you to make sure you are feeling supported and you have some actionable ways to move forward and improve your grant application to make sure it's more clear or connects further to the scoring rubric. You can apply again whenever you're ready. It's not one of those programs where you have to wait a year to apply again. If you're comfortable and want to apply right in the next month, you can give yourself some space and wait 2 or 3 months and apply again, but also thinking about the context of your project and what the use of funds would be as well. Part of Laura and I, what we can do is to gather feedback from the panelists who reviewed that initial application and send you the feedback and recommendations, which are directly connected to the review criteria. So to request that type of feedback, there's a link in the decline notification email. If you are to receive that, you just click the link and say, I want feedback and provide your name and information. It does sometimes take several weeks to process that feedback, depending on what Laura and I are doing throughout the year. Sometimes it could be 2 weeks, but sometimes it could take 4 to 6 weeks at times. So just building that in for expectations, but it is something that we can do and provide that additional recommendations from those panelists. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Laura to go through some frequently asked questions and wrap us up, unless you want to hand it back over to me, of course.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Emily. I think we've probably touched on at least the themes of most of these questions. So hopefully this is just kind of, again, just a reiteration of some of these points. But we do get a lot of questions, and these are the ones we see often. So the first being, my project is still in the early planning stage. Can I still apply? And hopefully you know by now that yes, you can absolutely apply. We recommend really reviewing the application types and the rubric carefully. Much of the scoring is really based on specific details and thorough descriptions. If details are still in the early phases, you should probably look at the planning grant, which is really why this was developed largely, is to support those early stages. So really look at the planning grant as an option there for those early planning stages. And of course, if you have questions, you can feel free to reach out to us to talk about the best track for your project. Another question that we frequently get is, I'm looking for funding to support living expenses and I don't have a specific project in mind. Can I apply for a creativity grant? And the answer here is really no. A creativity grant is intended for project-specific support. So the application really has to have details associated with a specific project to be eligible. However, artists that are looking for support for day-to-day expenses should consider the Grants for Artists program instead, which is a program that launched 2 years ago, and that's really intended to support what we call the general operating support for artists. So that's looking at your day-to-day expenses and is not necessarily associated with a specific project. So there's an option for you, but creativity would not be the right option at this time. Another question that we get frequently is, my project has received previous creativity funding. Can I apply again in a new fiscal year? This really depends. The official in the guidelines is that a project can only be funded once. However, if there are really distinct different phases or iterations of the project, future funding might be possible if the grant would clearly support different expenses and then could fall into either the planning or the implementation options. So if you have received previous funding, it's probably best to have a conversation with us to talk about the eligibility, if it would be eligible for future funding, or if it really wouldn't be a good fit at this time. But we are hoping that now having these new options for planning and implementation, that will help with this question going forward. Another question that we often get is, I'm eligible and applying to the Professional Development Opportunity Grant. Can I also apply for creativity in the same month? The answer here is yes, you can. You can apply and receive multiple grants in the same fiscal year, sometimes even in the same month. The Professional Development Opportunity Grant and the Creativity Grant, they both have a different set of goals and purposes to support completely different needs for artists or organizations. So you can absolutely apply to both of those at the same time if you'd like. Another question we see often is, my project is complete. Can I submit for reimbursement of expenses? This one is a no. We cannot reimburse for previously completed projects. You have to submit an application before the completion of a project to be considered eligible. Another question we often see is, I would like the grant to cover expenses associated with bringing a non-Maryland artist to Maryland. Is this allowed? This is a possibly. If the grant funding would support a non-Maryland artist, it's really recommended that you share a clear description as to why this particular non-Maryland artist would bring significant value to your project and to Maryland audiences. This is also probably another scenario where we would highly recommend checking in with one of us to talk through that particular scenario to ensure eligibility, and to also just talk about the best way to illustrate that within your application. And finally, a lot of times we have people ask, how can I share work samples, letters of support, reviews, other materials such as that with the application? And as I think Emily mentioned before, external documents are not considered a part of the review of the creativity application. So the panelists are only going to look at the 3 narrative questions per the scoring criteria. So it's not needed, it's not necessary to include any additional work samples or letters of support or anything to that effect. We also really want to recommend that you don't include any kind of important information in links, as they will not be considered. So sometimes, people will say, you can find out more on my website here. The applicant or the panelists are not going to look at that website. So make sure you really detail it in the narrative itself. All right, coming down the home stretch here. One of our final helpful hints is to apply early. So you are eligible to apply at any time, with the rolling deadline for the creativity grant, but we really do encourage you to apply early whenever possible. That's also really important to think about when you're thinking about the payment process. So payment is processed outside of our offices. If you're awarded, the payment will take approximately 6 to 8 weeks to be received. So really think about that when it comes to your timeline and when you're planning on incurring those expenses, when you need those funds. Build that into your own personal timeline when you're thinking about that. Another final helpful hint here is before you submit your application, Emily and we are available to review and or meet about your application and offer feedback on your draft. That's what we're here for. We're very happy to read drafts and offer that feedback. So you can feel free to email us to request feedback on your draft. Do make sure that you don't submit it. If it is clicked submit on, in Smart Simple, then unfortunately it is officially submitted. So we want to make sure we're only looking at a draft, but you can feel free to email that to us. Like Emily said, our schedules really vary depending on deadlines and other needs in other programs. So do allow for several weeks to receive that kind of feedback. If you email us today saying, the end of the month is tomorrow, can I get feedback? We're probably going to say no. So just make sure you're taking that into consideration when you're thinking about your schedule. Finally, we just want to show some quick slides here in the last 4 minutes about Smart Simple. Smart Simple is our grants platform. You can access that by going to marylandarts.smartsimple.com. There's also links all over our website, which will get you to that page. As an applicant, you will need to register within Smart Simple to apply. You would either register as an independent artist if you're applying individually, or you can register your organization if you're going that way. If you don't have that login set up, you would hit the little blue register button on that landing page, and it would just take you through a series of questions, basic contact information to set up your account. If you do have an account, then you could just enter in your email and your password and click login, and that will bring you into your landing page. Your dashboard, what you're going to want to look for is the section that says My Applications, and the section that will be all the way on the left-hand side that says Opportunities. Depending on the time of year and depending on what you are eligible for, there might be a different number above this. Right here in this screenshot, it's a number 2. But you would click on that opportunity section, which would open then a list of applications that are currently available. You would want to look for the creativity grant option, and then you would want to click the blue Apply Now button that corresponds to that option within the list. Once you click Apply Now, it's going to open the application itself, which would look something like this once you open it. A helpful thing to do here is once you get to this part, you want to pretty immediately click Save Draft at the bottom. It's a little blue button, Save Draft. This kind of activates the application, so you need to do that in order to start the application. Once you do that, it's pretty much going to walk you through the application. You can kind of see here on the screen, there's the different tabs: contact information, program details, financial information, etc. So it would walk you through the different narrative sections so that you enter in the corresponding information. We do highly recommend clicking Save Draft throughout while you're entering in that information. The system does not auto-save. That's something really important to point out. We've seen some sad cases of people that have lost information. Make sure you click Save Draft throughout so that way you don't lose anything. Once you are entered in, you have everything, you're good to go, you would then want to click the blue Submit button, and that would then officially submit your application for consideration. And I believe that is our last slide here, and we have exactly 1 minute. So I don't think, unfortunately, we're not going to have time to take individual questions. But hopefully you've gotten a pretty good sense of this new option for the planning grant. Of course, if you have questions or if you want to discuss anything one-on-one, we're here to help. Emily's email, my email is here on the screen for you. You can also find information on our website, msac.org. We are more than happy to help with anything to make sure that you know where to go, which application is best for you. And I think that is it. Emily, anything to wrap us up here?
No, I think that's it. Just a huge thank you for joining us today. And again, as another reminder that this was recorded, so we'll put this recording up on the program pages for the creativity grant probably by the end of the month before the application opens, along with the updated guidelines and rubric and other helpful resources. So you can look out for that on the creativity grant page in the upcoming weeks. But we're so happy to be able to offer this new planning option for artists and our organizations who are at that beginning phase. And yeah, hopefully we can have some discussions with you all further to understand where you're at in your projects and help you along the way. So don't hesitate to send us an email or give us a call to talk through your questions. Yeah, great. Well, I think that's it. It's 1 o'clock on the dot. So we'll go ahead and stop the recording. And again, thanks again for being here. Enjoy your afternoon and look forward to chatting with you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.